welcome everyone to another one of the CavanKerry Press reading series extravaganzas, celebrating today, Deep Are These Distances Between Us by Susan Atefat-Peckham and edited by Darius Atefat-Peckham. This is a wonderful evening and a wonderful way to close out our reading series for the spring, as there will be 4 voices reading tonight, 3 of which who are here in the physical body and 1 who will be here in spirit. Susie's book has been long awaited, and we're so glad that we were able to help bring this to fruition with Darius and help from a bunch of Darius's friends and Susie's colleagues. And this is what we do at CavanKerry. We create books with love. We create books that need to be read, that need to be heard. So we're super excited for this 27th reading in our series of virtual readings. We're getting close to 30, y'all. This started pre-COVID, so we could get in contact with authors across the US, our authors. So it's really great that we are able to do this. It's super, super exciting. Thank you so much. You saw that screen broadcast is just to get our closed captionings in, so that's great. Okay, so let's actually start with the run of show. The run of show, we're going to start with Tawanda Mulalu first. And then afterwards, we're going to go to Allison Josephs, and then we will end with Darius. Throughout the evening, please, if you hear anything wonderful, put that in the chat so our authors know that we are here and we are receiving all those good poetic vibrations. Also, think about questions this evening. After the 3 authors have read, we will have a Q&A session where they will be taking questions from CavanKerry Press and the audience. We also have books on sale this evening. Until the end of this week, this book right here that just launched this month, Deep Are These Distances Between Us, will be on sale for 20% off if you use the coupon code DEEP. We do have, I have one of the many Allison Josephs books here, Speak and Spell by Glassliar Press, which is also available. I have her bookshop link down below so you could see her entire collection. And we also have Please Make Me Pretty, I Don't Want to Die by Tawanda Mulalu. And this one is actually on sale for 30% off, folks, with the coupon code MUL30. That will be in this chat, and it will also be in the YouTube link after the show. So without further ado, we'll actually start getting into our reading, and we are going to start with Tawanda. So if Gabe or Tamara, if you could take out Allison and Darius and we'll beam them back in later, that'll be great. Thank you so much. Tawanda Mulalu was born in Gaborone, Botswana in 1997. His first book, Please Make Me Pretty, I Don't Want to Die, was selected by Susan Stewart for the Princeton Series of Contemporary Poets and is listed as the best poetry book of 2022 by the Boston Globe, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. His chapbook, Nearness, was chosen as the winner of the New Delta Review 2020-2021 chapbook contest, judged by Brandon Shimoda. Tawanda's poems appear or are forthcoming in Brittle, Paper, Lana Turner, Lowell, the New England Review, the Paris Review, A Public Space, and elsewhere. Everyone, please give it up for Tawanda.
Hello, y'all. Thanks so much, CavanKerry Press, for having me. And thank you so much, Darius, for just being the absolute homie and just being in my life and letting me be in your life. Congratulations to your editorial stewardship of this book. Congratulations to your mother for an excellent second book of poems. I thought I would start by reading one of Susie's poems in her first book, and then I'll go on to some of mine, just to honor her legacy, and also because her poems are really fire, and I'm super glad to be in the space with Darius and Susie and Allison. So this is from Susan's first book, That Kind of Sleep. For tradition, I struggled with my grandmother's rosebush, pinching and bending branches, picking each red and yellow petal from tender stems. I pushed them into a glass of water set on the cement ledge and waited patiently in her lap, lacing my inked fingers around her neck, stroking the flesh skin, watching the black calluses on a soldier's hands through a space in the gate, and wondered if his twitching fingers could reach the glass. I now see the deep lines in her forehead, and a whispered prayer plays on her wrinkled lips. She holds the Quran to my swelling mouth, waiting for me, a woman now, to kiss the ruffled pages and pass under its broken spine. I hear her, full with care, spill the water at the gate and drop warm petals. For tradition, she says, for my quick return, as if the trail smeared in the mortar behind the car made a difference, as if a kiss on the holy book would keep us safe. I'm trying to focus a bunch of my poems tonight around family. I haven't been home in 3 years or so because of pandemic and visa stuff. So I've been thinking more and more about my family lately. So I'm going to rip a couple of poems involving my sister, my brother, and so on. My sister likes girls and does not return for my mother's 50th. Months after I hadn't had my first oyster, before I came to America. My sister in Canada now, where it starts snowing soon. Things I haven't seen keep cropping up. Movies are colonialism, and I'm such a dutiful director, swerving cameras around oceans I hadn't had before. Flying in, I'll ignore the masses of land locking home. I'll wait for the next flood to take us once we finish ballooning the sun and her hot response to our earthly gassiness. I haven't seen polar bears either yet. My sister posts pictures of herself swimming through snow, and the melting goes slow as it can. Every day I wake waiting for water, as if I'm still home, as if my ancestors are still praying for something as so simple as myself walking across the river here thinking, when? I'll jump into it in sheer drunken blaze. My sister had graduated. My phone's wet. My parents buzz. The leaves are red and falling now. Hadn't seen that before either. I'm always surprised by the rain. So that poem actually I wrote during the first poetry workshop I ever took with Darius, my senior year, his freshman year. And I'm just suddenly flooded back into that time period where I met this extremely warm man and gifted poet and just suddenly became extremely fast friends. And that workshop was beautiful for a number of reasons, but one of the things that I remember that makes this such a serendipitous event for me in relationship to Darius is towards the tail end of the workshop, Darius brought a series of extremely beautiful poems written directly after his mother's. And first of all, as a formal technique of response was ingenious, but as a way of honoring literary legacy was something so brilliant and human that you don't really see in that many poets. And I'm just honored to be here with you, my friend. This poem is called Forgiveness Rock Record. And where should I find myself, if not in my mother's eyes, or my father's hands, or my sister's care for the world? And if I should die because that is the way the world was designed. And what was the thing that drew me up from myself as if a river flowed upwards towards the pull of the moon? And would you not want to be a tide song, called for constantly by the mere fact of rock, large, white, above, asking you to be real by virtue of movement, of its heaviness regarding movement, and to be seen as a slow tragedy of the sun's shadow? I'm asking for this life to call for me. I'm asking myself to call for the acceptance of this skin, its predispositions navigated keenly by eyes which aren't my own, by histories pieced and unpieced together by various arguments of human, sometimes even of love, like watching those that were born before me decide they were this thing called human and summon themselves. What is there beneath the rock? Is it as heavy as the rock itself? American cartoons said that the moon was made of stinky cheese. I thought marshmallows. Or of another sweet I cannot recall that bursts into powders of soft sugar upon biting it. Or maybe it is the cautious marble of a jawbreaker, so large that my sister and I stored them in the fridge and licked them over the curve of days leading up to some other sort of awareness. Somewhere along the line, she is wronged, touched. It might have been then. I couldn't see, didn't see. She's older. I was greedy, and eventually its big sphere would soften to a pearl, its wrapping finally larger than the thing it held. Maybe, dear moon, what I am asking of you is to become the sun, or vice versa. Or why can't I sleep for as long as I used to? It is not that I don't want to be alive, he says convincingly, but that there is a calmness of constant possibility that sleeping affords, that to be woken so early, so constantly now by my body as if he is begging me, really begging me to change my life, to not reach the age of I have wasted my life, to say to itself that I have a life, to say to others, I want to be in this world, to really be able to hear the words, I love you, and I want to be with you, and you're a good person, and people like you, and you're beautiful, and not want to instantly retreat to some question of how unlike the moon is to the sun, but how they hold one another, even if one is nearly always disappearing. Yes, that's what I wanted, to hear myself as if I were another person in another's mouth, as if that were what it is to live. Okay, so maybe it was. This next poem is called My Brother Does Not Return for My Mother's 50th. Egg that could, but did not quite. I see you in their museums, the cold, dark African masks, your blank face. To not find you walking with me with these stolen faces, to not find you crawling up from dust. I left you landlocked with our parents, heard tides before my body, wet axes carving shore to noise. And who has ever rescued the drive home? Washed my crusted hands and what? Stubborn grains. Dried my hands with a cold towel. Your little hands dried but could not hold their shores, though other grains now live between your fingers. This world would not hold little hands but turn to dust. At this party, I sip on bitter dark drink, bearing warm speeches while your body turns to airlessness. My thoughts on this glass, roundedness of your once new skull I never saw. My flight returns to their shores. Your face escapes me. I'm going to wrap up with two poems about when I used to be a third grade teacher assistant, and the kids that I miss from that time period. One of them actually just called me up like about an hour before I'm reading here, so I just wanted to read some kiddie poems to, you know, thinking about the continuity of life, and when I met those kids, I wasn't in a very good place, but having them in my life made me believe that I could live a certain way. And so this is for both of them. Well, two poems about two kids, but it's for all the kids. Not a snow day. Please stop. Enough froth over this land, and the traffic fills with impatient radio. A radio is the only pinprick of voice nearer now than skin. A child asks to touch me and I tell her not to. She pokes me. I swab the itchy lengths of my nostrils and God says again, do you like it when I touch you like this? Everything familiar and awful always, and the test tube carries me to a lab. This morning, the shower's water is careful and warm, but the air. I walked in late to school and the same child here waiting just outside the door, sleepy and shivering. I sanitized her hands. I teach her how to divide. Before I wrap up with this last poem, I just want to thank everybody here for coming over again, and just also want to encourage everybody to grab Deeper the Distances Between Us. It's a gorgeous book, and the editor as well, a gorgeous human being. Thanks for spending time with us today. Incidentally, if for some odd reason you like the sound of my voice, the audiobook version of this dropped today, so you can also cop that on Audible. But last poem, American Elegy. I know no music for how a country should end. I no longer want to be pretty for you, not even for myself. If I must watch you burn while performing my own arias, then I will watch you burn with my throat. If I must sing another world to live, then my tongue arrives earlier than the final star in this brief stretch of time called a self. In the classroom today, another child practices purring. On all fours, she crawls up to me and presses her hair and ears against my leg, and it is the truest thing to happen to my skin. I move back to scold her. She laughs, and I laugh with need. I needed you, America. I needed to speak another world into my lungs. This piercing instrument of my clavicle stretched towards sunrise, they sing for you, my throat fleming from tar to tongue, sing for you, my lips brushing yours, burning and black. Much love, y'all. Thank you.
Tawanda, my goodness. Oh, it was so great to hear your words in person. Well, quasi person, close to person, close to person. Everyone, please make me pretty. I don't want to die by Tawanda Mulalu, available right now from Princeton University. Coupon code for the paperback edition, MUL30 for 30% off, and the audiobook just dropped for it today. Tawanda, thank you so much. I'm going to beam you out, and very soon you'll come back. All right. I also forgot to mention our land acknowledgement from the beginning with my excitement. So I do want to pivot just for a second before I bring on Allison Josephs to take a moment to acknowledge that the land we occupy in Bergen County, New Jersey, where CavanKerry is located, belongs to the Lenni Lenape people. We honor their history, and we cannot function in our work as arts activists nor offer a space for our writers without understanding the struggle for Indigenous rights. Additionally, we join arts organizations across the country in celebrating Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, Mental Health Awareness Month, and of course, acknowledging mothers and those who take on the role of mothers. We honor the crucial role of poetry in articulating these varied sociocultural landscapes of the world, and we encourage each of you to support a more equitable and inclusive publishing industry by reading and celebrating work and poetry from all of these groups, not just in May, but always. I'm going to bring on Allison Josephs. And Allison, I'll start with your bio, and then the floor will be yours. So Allison Josephs lives in Carbondale, Illinois, where she is on the faculty at Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. Her most recent collections of poems are Lexicon by Red Hen Press in 2021, winner of the Best Poetry Book of 2021 award from Poetry by the Sea, a global conference, and A Proper Weave by Kelsey Books 2022, Speak and Spell, Glassliar Press 2022, and Confessions of a Barefaced Woman, Red Hen Press 2018. Confessions of a Barefaced Woman won the 2019 Feathered Quill Book Award and was a finalist for the 2019 NAACP Image Award. She was named Illinois Author of the Year for 2022 by the Illinois Association of Teachers of English. Her poems have appeared in the New York Times and the Best American Poetry Series. Her next book, Dwelling, will be published by Red Hen in 2025. She is the widow of beloved poet and editor John Tribble. And this is all to say that it is an honor for us, to have her with CavanKerry this evening. Thank you, Allison.
Hello, everyone. Talking to you from my messy bedroom. I am so honored and so thrilled to be part of the celebration for this beautiful, beautiful book. I want to congratulate everyone involved with the production of this book, CavanKerry Press, and of course, the beautiful, beautiful Darius. I wanted to mention that my first encounter with Susie was at Hope College many, many, many moons ago. I don't even know if Darius was in this world yet. The occasion was February, Hope College, Holland, Michigan. I was there reading from my work with A. Van Jordan, and I was so excited because we were reading an old theater, a beautiful historic theater, and they had put our names up on the marquee. And I remember meeting Susie and Jack Riddle and Rhoda Jansen and the wonderful writers there at Hope. It wasn't tulip season yet. One thing Holland, Michigan is famous for is an explosion of color in tulips. And my first impression of Susie, the word I would use to this day is luminous. She was lit from this lightness from within. And when I look at Darius's face, I see that same beauty and wit and luminosity. So I'm so thrilled to be part of this celebration. I also know that this kind of work, doing a book like this is not easy. It takes soul power. I guess that's the way I would put it. I recently lost my husband, John Tribble, and there's a fourth book. John, during his lifetime, published 3 books, and there's a fourth book that was about to be published when he passed away, and it's been bedeviling me what to do next. So this is an object lesson for anyone who is doing that kind of soul work, that it can be done, that you can bring that voice back into the conversation, back into the world. So I'm going to read a few poems from my latest full-length book, Lexicon, and thinking that it was just Mother's Day, my mother makes an appearance all throughout this book. And our mothers are often our first critics, the first people to say, yeah, you should be a writer. My mother was an immigrant to 3 separate countries. My mother was born in Jamaica, and she, at age 19, got on a boat with a slip of paper with an address in London, and that's where she went to. She studied, she was part of what they called the Windrush generation. She studied to be a nurse. We were born, my older sister and I were born in London. Then we, as many Caribbean Canadian people do, we moved to Toronto, Canada, and finally the Bronx, New York. But I say all this because she hasn't let me go. She's still talking to me. So there's a poem in this book called My Posthumous Mother. So I want to read it in honor of my mother and in honor of Darius's mother. My posthumous mother. She likes that I have a state job, well paying, even if the state isn't New York. Working for the city, any city, is just too hard, too few benefits for the work. She likes that I'm married, even if my husband isn't Black, not Caribbean. Wonders when we're going to stop fooling around, get down to business, and make her some grandbabies, half white, half Black. She doesn't care. Disappointed that I don't go to church or read the Bible or think of Jesus. She'd trade a few textbooks for hymn books, wants me to pray more, put my palms together, lift my face to the Lord. Always a bargain lover. She's glad to hear what we paid for this house, likes that I put money away in savings, never touch it, letting interest accrue on cash in case of catastrophe, illness, death. She's sad that I don't vacuum more, dust more, that I let crusty dishes settle in the sink for days, that I have forgotten everything I might have learned watching her at the stove, her hands busy with chicken, rice, peas, water, callaloo, yams, whatever made the house fragrant. Sad to see me eat out so much. She says she'd rather see me cook up a savory meal of rice and pigeon peas, pan of stewed chicken, meat so soft it falls from the bone, marrow ready to be sucked. She likes hearing about my students, their excuses, dramas, little victories, patients, students. Not much difference in her view. Her hospitals and my universities both needed to sustain us all. She reminds me to go to the doctor, to take my vitamin, carry tissues in my purse, to have spare change for the bus or subway, to walk with my umbrella on overcast days, to keep 2 pairs of gloves in winter, to try to learn to drive, though she never did. Wake each day grateful, she says, for what you have. I wake each day glad to have been her child, sorry that I cannot bring her a cup brimming with warm tea, a little sugar and milk, making it sweet enough to start the day. I'm going to read a poem that takes place in one of Susie's academic homes. After Hope College, Susie was at Georgia College and State University, which is a school in Milledgeville, Georgia. It keeps changing its name, but I think at the time I visited, it was Georgia College and State University. And I was in a bed and breakfast, and I have utmost respect for anyone who runs a bed and breakfast. Now, we're not talking about one of those sterile Airbnb apartments. We're talking about the real deal bed and breakfast, the kind of place where they feed you and they want you to make small talk in the morning. This is called Why I'm a Terrible Bed and Breakfast Patron. I'm always afraid I'll break the antiques. And frankly, I don't really care for them. One chair as good as another to me, as long as it accommodates my butt. I don't like innkeeper small talk, refuse to pet the resident dog or cat, not caring how old the house is, who owned it before the current owners, or where the drapes came from, or how authentically the grounds have been restored to former glory. Reluctant to leave a cheery message in the guest book. Isn't the fact I stayed here enough? I know the owners want oohing and awing from me, curiosity, expressions of awe about floral patterns and chifforogues. I'm sorry. I can't do it. I don't care about who slept here 100 years ago, or 20 years ago, or last night. I don't care how aged the trees, are out front? What flowers, freshly cut, reside in these vases one of my clumsy elbows might send skidding to the parquet floors? I want to go home where the chairs don't match. The lawn's got stumps from sawing down trees of no historical significance, and the carpets came from the discount place down the highway. I want to go home where hands that only I know will cook my breakfast, will caress my lips and face to welcome me home, back to my own bed. That poem starts out as, sort of an irascible rant, but what it's really about is homesickness. And we're all homesick for places that we never have actually lived. So I'm going to read one more poem from this book, and then I'm going to read what I call a wet paint poem. If you write as much as I do, you have a lot of poems that are in, and I handwrite everything. Notebooks are all over my house. But this was I've been working on a collection about my loss, about losing John. And this poem that I'll read after the next poem, it'll be the last poem I read, is one of those breakthrough poems where you think, okay, I've got the heart of the book now. But this is a poem about John and me. We were married back in the 90s, and we were poor graduate students, so we didn't have any money. So we got married in Bloomington, Indiana, where we were graduate students going through the MFA program there, studying with Yusef Komanyaka, David Wojahn, Maura Stanton. Really wonderful time to be a young poet and working with those people. We got married on December 30th. So I had thought, it's between semesters. If you're in academia, you get things done between semesters. I thought we could just walk and find a justice of the peace, because the movies had made me think, you can just find a justice of the peace on the corner. Apparently, you had to book all the justices of the peaces weeks in advance. So someone said, if you two want to get married, the city clerk can marry you. Like, okay. So we went to see the city clerk. She walked us through the procedure. She said, come back on this day, on this time on December 30th, and I'll marry you. I'll marry you two to each other. And we did. And when we showed up, she wasn't there. She was sick. So the assistant city clerk, who looked to be around maybe 22 years old, married us. And this was back in the 90s. So they had these mimeograph sheets of the vows. And I forgot to get a copy of it. So to this day, I don't know what I agreed to. And that was always a running joke between me and John. I don't know what I agreed to. So we always updated it. But this is called Ordinary Dress. I never cared for wedding gowns. Got married in purple and black, a dress with black buttons up and down. It hangs in my closet still, stuck in the back. Got married in purple with a black collar, long sleeves, hem right at my knee. It hangs in my closet still, stuck in the back. It's too tight now, too small for me. Collar, long sleeves, hem at my knee, cloth too thin for Indiana winter, December. It's too tight now, too small for me. All I can do is remember. Cloth too thin for Indiana winter, December. Wind whipped it open. I had to pin it shut. All I can do is remember my sheer stockings and my trembling. When wind whipped it open, I had to pin it shut with a borrowed safety pin. My sheer stockings and my tremblings. made no difference to my future husband. Held together with a borrowed safety pin, I said vows I've since forgotten, made no difference to my husband, who cares little about how fat I've gotten. I said vows I've since forgotten, keep a dress with black buttons up and down. Don't care about how fat I've gotten. I'll never wear a wedding gown. So this is the last poem, and it's really wet paint, but sometimes you have to write that really painful poem. You have to pull it out. And I was teaching a workshop online for the International Women Writers Guild, which is a great organization that does a lot of programming, much of which is free. And I was doing one of their Friday free writes where the goal is to get people to generate work. So this is a poem called Viewing the Body. And again, I'm so grateful and honored to be part of this celebration. Thank you so much for including me. Viewing the body. I remember the cuts on his face, cleaned up from his fall to pavement. I remember his fine hands, now immobile on his chest. Hands he thought too stubby, unsightly. Hands that wrote poems and lesson plans, cards for his family flung far and wide. I remember his lush hair, combed perfectly by caring morticians. Hair so thick, all his barbers exclaimed at its constant growth. He never let 2 weeks pass without a haircut. I remember how scared I was to touch it, touch him, this body on a slab, this former husband whose heart stopped when I wasn't around, wandering wife. I remember they gave me his last clothes in a shopping bag, as if we'd just bought him a new outfit at JCPenney. I remember his eyes, your eyes, those beautiful eyes were shut, closed now, and I wasn't the one who sealed them last. Thanks so much.
Oh my goodness, Allison. Thank you so much for this gift. It's really a blessing for you to be here with us. And that poem has taken out at least 95% of everyone that's reading and here with us today. That was a beautiful, beautiful poem to end on. And thank you so much for your vulnerability and grace with sharing that, as well as the other work and your work about Susie. Yeah, I'm super excited for our questions. I'm already thinking of questions already. And I'll be calling you back in shortly after Darius, so we could all have a conversation together. Again, thank you so much. That was beautiful. Okay, everyone. And in the chat, Tamara put the link for Allison's book list. Every book, every poem from Allison is a gift. It's a pleasure. So please consider copying several of those books. They're absolutely amazing. Thank you so much, Allison. And now we're transitioning to, we're continuing with the celebration. It's not a transition. We're just going to continue celebrating the life and love and legacy of Susan Atefat-Peckham, as well as Darius, who had such an amazing, did such an amazing job editing this book and working with the press. It's just a feat to behold. And this cover, if you thought this cover was beautiful, it's such a beautiful cover. The words that are in it and the experiences in it are even more immaculate and gorgeous. That is on sale for 20% off. We'll have a coupon code in there if you don't already have the book. And Darius, I'm going to give you the floor. As I said, we have spirits with us today, as well as the readers here. So I'm going to start with Susie's bio. Afterwards, Darius, I'll read yours, and then you'll have the floor to read. Susan Atefat-Peckham, 1970 to 2004, was born in New York to Iranian immigrant parents and lived most of her life in Switzerland and the United States. Her collection of poetry, That Kind of Sleep, won the National Poetry Series in 2000, selected by Victor Hernandez Cruz, and was published by Coffee House Press. In addition to writing poetry, she was an accomplished pianist and visual artist. She taught creative writing at Hope College and Georgia College and was a volunteer for Caritas, Habitat for Humanity, and the United Way. Since her death in 2004, while on a Fulbright scholarship in Amman, Jordan, Atefat-Peckham's anthology of Middle Eastern writing, Talking Through the Door, was published by Syracuse University Press. And now Darius Atefat-Peckham is an Iranian-American poet and essayist. His work has appeared in Poetry, Poem a Day, the Georgia Review, Shenandoah, Michigan Quarterly Review, the Journal, and Indiana Review, and in the anthology, My Shadow is My Skin, Voices from the Iranian Diaspora. He is the author of the chapbook, How Many Love Poems by Seven Kitchens Press in 2021. In 2018, Atefat-Peckham was selected by the Library of Congress as a National Student Poet. Atefat-Peckham lives in Huntington, West Virginia, and currently studies English and Near Eastern languages and civilizations at Harvard University. Thank you for being with us, Darius.
Thank you, Dimitri. And yeah, I want to start with gratitude to CavanKerry Press, to everyone who's here today, to Tawanda and Allison, and I think that this is really affirming my belief that Susie's poetic practice was in pursuit of a kind of gathering of preservation of family history and beloveds. You are all beloveds, and I am really touched. Allison, both Allison and Tawanda almost made me cry. I can't cry before my reading. Trying not to cry during my reading. But I think that this is the most nervous I've ever been for a reading, and partly I think that's because I've been kind of terrified to to represent Susie, and what I'm realizing is that she is that she is forever teaching me things, that she's forever a part of my work, my poetry that's original, and then also the work that I do in scholarship and editing with Iranian writers and working in the diaspora. And I'm just really lucky to have her be a part of me and a part of the world continuously. She was such a prolific writer. It's insane. She had essays, a book of essays, a book of poems. The book of essays is unpublished, but then one of the essays starts this collection. This second book of poems. She wrote a diary for nearly every year of her life, almost every day, which are like just as beautiful somehow as like her the prose that she edited and like worked on. She was just insane. She took pictures, she painted, she was a musician. She just, I don't know, it's just, she gathered this beauty all around her. And I have always had that to look up to. And I want to thank my parents as well, and my stepmom and my dad, and my grandparents who always supported me, always, like, I would have never had the confidence to pursue this kind of project at like 22 years old. And if not for their belief in me, and I'm just so lucky. I'm so lucky. But that being said, I really want her voice to be heard, without much interruption from me, or, you know, more so, I want the poems to be able to speak, and I'm going to try to give little context so that they can really, so you can get a feel of like her language, this kind of whirling she does in language that allows her to see and perceive and gather all of this like beauty. And I want to start with her language from the foreword that I wrote for the manuscript. I include an interview from poets and writers. So I'll just start with a bit of that and then jump into the poems. And thank you again. Thank you. I love you all. In an interview with poets and writers just following the publication of her first book, That Kind of Sleep, Susie expanded on the roles of familial love and religion in her new work. This is Susie's language. The family, the children especially, are the most important part of our culture, besides the religion. The religion accentuates the closeness of the family as well. Because I was writing out of absence, my poetry brought people I hadn't seen in a long time back to me. In the poems, I can make them come back to life. I can put the words in their mouths. I can see them moving again. Every time someone reads that poem, every time I read that poem, these people are there. In many ways, I think I wrote this book to fill the spaces between us. So obviously, you know, as if you've read a few poems, you know that the title is somewhat of a misnomer. It's Deep Are These Distances Between Us. But of course, the entire project is about connection, both between the living and the dead, the geographically separated, the beloveds that exist in many different facets. And the first poem I'll read is one of the many poems that she wrote about the loss of her grandfather, who is dear to her, and I never was able to meet my great-grandfather. But you know, through all these poems about grief that are in her book, I realized that I was, you know, part of this process was I had to retype every poem into my computer, which, if you've done that exercise for other poets, you know that you get to know the moves that they make. You get to know sort of this like emotional landscape that they were existing within when they wrote the poem. And I realized very suddenly in this sort of spiritual revelation that I am akin to my mother. That my mother was also a human being who experienced similar grief, and was teaching me about how to grieve, how to love in grief, how to hold our ancestors at our work. This first poem is called Faces. Mother traces windows with her hands in the air. His face, just his face sticking through the shroud, she says. And I think of the round, steaming spot of marrow in the cooked leg of lamb when he crouched to the ground and tapped his hard palm to the joint, the strip of singed blood slipping from sliced bone onto the bread where he spread and rolled it. And she says, I just held his face, then bends, cups her hands in her lap. I imagine his face like this, sticking from muslin like an oval flower bed, like the silver cover of a samovar, like water in an open teapot, or fire from his lighter, or the tip of his burning cigarette, clover-shaped, like nun no chochi, or habd, pistachios on baklava, almonds in halva, the rounds of gas white in the tray, glowing like crescent moons, my mother holding all this in her hands, and I think, how beautiful. Sitting in bed, I can't imagine grandfather dead. Nothing dies in places we've left behind. Mother's hands shade her knees. Darkness drops its light over the balcony where she sits alone, thousands of miles from home. I think one of the things about that poem that really was beautiful to me was the way we are transported. I've never been to Iran. Susie did get to go when she was younger, but was separated from this place of her origins by revolution, by many different factors, 9/11, and she wasn't able to go back to see her grandfather for a long time before he died. The next poem I want to read is called "The Memory of Cells." In part, all these poems, like it's about this, and that's this image of my Bibi, who's here, holding all of these things that she held for me, that she brought back from Iran so that I could experience the taste of it, the smell of it. This is a way that we love each other. The Memory of Cells. Grandfather, memory must be subatomic. The cells remember when the tumor blooms, choking silent the neck, where only darkness once breathed through and through, a sore heart seething in the ribs of your throat, a seed hanging by one root, an albalu fruit. That tiny red thought, it's chromosomal. The cells, they remember all the dark passageways of the body. I carry your dying inside me like this, remembering your first symptom, unable to swallow, when you swallowed all your life, mastasade, hoping to keep doctors away, swallowed all that lean beef and lamb, sure to cut the fat off first, no liquor, no drugs. What good did it do? I remember your never setting heels on the street of anyone you even suspected had cancer, as if you could breathe the sickness in. We all have our superstitions. I think, don't tempt the body. This, when I force my legs to jog down our suburban Michigan streets, far from the hot tar Tehran smells of your house, of wet asphalt, your body, your soap, force myself through echoes of your voice, praying through lake effect heat, wind, sleet, fog, whatever, as if running from the bone-bearing paring knife, bowls full of marrow, and I'm sure I know how I will die. The pull of thighs, tearing through tangles of leaves. Walls cluster quiet Midwestern homes toward the lake, while the future courses through the beating heart, over and over, keeping time, pushing through blue burning water to sky, through torn seams of membranes, we burst from the deep, dark, black mouth of memory. It's kind of insane. She just, you don't really think that a poet could write like the same amount of power in every poem, but she does. It's really, when I was little, Rachel used to read me the poems every night before bed, and it was, I think both of us, after a few poems every night, it was like, we need to breathe a little, like, and it was a kind of like breath. She was like instigating breath, it's a beautiful thing. But I'm going to read a poem about that she wrote about my aunt Nina, my chala Nina, who passed during the pandemic. I never got to meet her, but every time she called, she would just repeat like, Darius, I love you, kiss you, and my great grandma too. And she used to send me dolls when I was little, but she was emotionally stunted and she was mentally disabled. And so oftentimes when I was little, I just loved talking to her because she brought so much energy and love and like this, she was, I don't know, she was like a little girl. She was wonderful. Nina calls. She's very beloved to my baby and to Susie as well. Nina calls, and Esmat hears, but cannot speak. The garden hose cut and wrapped around her neck, working the flesh with markings that leave red welts for weeks. She chokes a sound, struggles, the edges of the hose hanging sharp behind her back where he stands and tightens again, squeezing her throat. And I think, was this how it felt for grandfather in the end? Nina, irate, stops waiting, comes out to complain from her bedroom, sees grandmother's legs kick the corner window. And when Nina sees her stockings, the man behind grandmother, garden hose in one hand, carpet blade in the other, crazed eyes, she screams and screams and screams, the kind of scream that outdoes any house alarm, the scream that begins in the dark deep of the uterus and climbs the body for air, from the black throat of the earth to the rocks, to the roses, to the street, through the city, to the mosque, to the sky, and into heaven, where she imagines grandfather even will hear the intruder drumping the wall and scampering past the wild dogs, a neighbor in pursuit who never catches him. The rest of the neighbors bursting from their doors, climbing the gate, the walls, pouring out like molten steel while Nina screams and grandmother lies in the asphalt, alive, her legs limp, her stockings marked with water, the water still running, rolling dirt, bubbling around the roses. And they all look at Nina, the way her round thighs press together, pinching her dress in between, a tiny mountain, bashful, often called unwell, crazy, a terrible pain, who is now quiet. They think what they never thought before. Thank God for Nina, mother says. Thank God there's always an ear listening in the silence. Okay. The next poem I'll read is kind of an outlier because it wasn't actually in the original version of the manuscript, but I found it in an old printing of Arts and Letters from, where is that? It's from Georgia College, maybe? But yeah, I think it's Georgia College. And then I was like, this is one of my favorite poems. And I remembered hearing it when I was younger through some ceremony in memorial of Susie. And it's one of those poems where I go back to and I'm like, oh, I'm getting the motherly advice still through the work. And part of it is that it affirms my decision not to be in the sciences. We were not meant for this. My family was not meant for the sciences. But it's called Dissecting Turtles. I know well the beating heart of the turtle, and the burning of the sawed shell is that smell in the dark, early hours of morning, when hundreds of turtles' eyes blink beneath Georgia clay water, their backs humped like stones in the lake bed, hundreds of hearts cupped inside. I know well the live snapping turtle we dissected in pre-med physiology, the rotary saw screeching deep into its speckled shell, how, even paralyzed, spine pithed at the neck, the turtle fought, rocked on its back like an unsteady bowl, its clacking head tilting its balance, its limbs hung limp, its neck pulled tight to the right by a white cotton noose, knotted to the silver knob of a gas valve that jutted like a command from the lab's black formica. My silence slipped down the dark hollow of its mouth that opened and clacked shut like the steady crack of a Bunsen burner that cannot be lit, but wraps with a hard succession of sparks. I never held the saw, but bore into the night at the table, not the snapping mouth, until the shell gave way to an inner world of moving metals and water, the hundreds of billions of atoms that travel from space to the ocean, to the turtle, to us. We are all massed atoms of thought, each particle in orbit around another, and I rested the whorls of my bare fingerprint on the heart's 3 chambers, where I felt its tissues swell, then squeeze, thrust, and whiten. I would think of this whiteness. For years, I could not bear the smell of hot bone. For years, I would lie in bed remembering the rope. Had you followed me then from above those 3 chambers, you might have found yourself here, 16 years later in my front hall, where I stood in a dream of gold and green turtles, hundreds appearing on my rugs, my wood, my chairs, till I filled bags and bags and bags with them, lifted and carried them out to the grass for fear of killing them. because I would not willfully kill, and because one should never strike a heart that rushes and beats with this world. I think it gives you a good sense of the kind of person she was. I think, so the next one is emotional for me for many reasons, but it's this third poem in a trio of poems that are written for me. They were the first poems that I found of the manuscript. They were included in a a scrapbook that my baby made, and I love this, but is of lunchbox notes that she wrote to Cyrus, my brother, every day when he was going to school. And they're like these really profound, beautiful little notes that that are like somehow so brilliant. Like it's like those shows that you watch and you're like, this is so great for kids and for adults. But she was really good at that, spanning that range. Yeah, but like I found those, first of all, those are beautiful, but then there were these three poems to me, and then there were two letters for each of my birthdays, that she was alive for three, but I think she wrote for two letters. So yeah, but I remember just sitting on the closet floor and reading this over and over and over again. 3, to my son at 10 months. You hold the moon in your eye for now, your face still bright with remembered sounds, a skipped beat, red gurgle of water, whirring of breath, blue with wanting, with waiting for you. And I am glad. The moon will always lift and turn your hands in pointed spirals, spinning like windmills, twisting air. My ear at your back, I hear oceans of breath, your heartbeat turning and returning as if a thought just forgotten, and your voice, moonlit, lightens the quiet, exhaling night back to the sky. This was also one of the poems that in Tawanda's workshop I wrote back to, and yeah, I was thinking like back then of doing a book of call and response poems with her, and then when I found the rest of the poems and was made aware of them, I was sort of like, oh, I don't even need to do this because she has so many gorgeous unpublished poems, but maybe that's a project one day that I'll continue. I'm going to read a few more via time. People are interested. I'm sure you are, as I am. I feel like I can't stop reading these poems once I start. But there's this one is called Walking Home in Autumn. My hands push to my pockets. A mile ahead, a figure approaches, and I wonder which of us will cross to the other side first. The leaves turn. One whirls its tips to the sky as if a dervish, one hand toward God, the other toward earth. We all exist inside our own pockets of emptiness. Pour your light into these washed palms, and I will hold joy there like a veined sun. Yeah, that was one of my favorite poems, just about joy and how to carry it, even after all these, I think one thing that I love about Tawanda and Allison's poems as well is that there's this, they teach me how to look at these shared histories, these violent histories, and also be able to find this abundance and experience and in love for one another, in continuance, how to love in difficult situations, and persist in that. I should mention Allison Josephs In Every Seam was one of the first books of poems I ever read that wasn't my mom's. And it was so influential for me. It was handed to me with the context of this was a poet and this is a book that Susie loved. And Rachie handed it to me and she said, and this is a book that I love. So very important and very amazing to be here and reading with her. But Someone mentioned this poem in the chat, Continuance, and I think it might be a good poem to maybe penultimate poem. Continuance. What is there in this stillness that tars the roof? Dried blades of grass strewn on the sidewalk promise someone will sweep. The burst of roadside petals will fly from under a passing tire. A cloud of cinnamon will rush through a sunbeam when a window blows on hot oatmeal. Hundreds of birds at dusk folding into oceans of peppered sky. The promise that we can never die. Inside the green blade and the hand that sweeps it, the wingtip and the wind it rides. These small lives call. How is the forgetting this vast and the key this small? What is true in a place is always the history it occupies. The child that climbs to the back seat after school, the woman who now waits in line, remembering the very arc of stepping into afternoons of promised cartoons and Oreos and humid New Jersey hours inside the sun. Inside the house, the sun beating the hours into the roof, saying, today will lead to some place of repeated comfort where even scars will brighten. And then I think I will finish with the last poem in the book, which is for Susie's grandfather. It's called Where You Are. Because I breathe, I can tell the backyard in grandmother's garden, the back tooth of Nina's yawning, the stones in Lily's gallbladder rolling the flesh juice into rivers, like mother's, like yours. But grandfather, tell me the stars, tell me the nowhere, because I'm still in the universe. I breathe in this good earth and call it my own. Thank you all for being here.
Oh my goodness, Darius, so many people in the chat said that they could just hear you read this for the rest of the night when you mentioned it. It's such a beautiful book. And I spent some time with it as a draft when you sent it in, and I was floored by Susie's work. It's just so lush. And so necessary and even so contemporary, even though this work has been sitting for a very long time.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of stuff that we look for here. And I thank you so much for putting in the effort to bring this into the world, because it's so needed.
Thank you all. I was like, the first place I sent it is the place I wanted to take it the most, and you took it and you did such a beautiful job with it. And I just I'm just so lucky to be a part of CavanKerry's family through Susie, with Susie. It's really been a beautiful experience. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. And the family expands, right? It just continues to expand. So this is amazing. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. We have about 15 minutes until our scheduled close, so we're going to have a bit of a conversation. Please put any questions you would like for Allison, for Darius, for Tawanda in the chat, and we'll be sure to get around to those. I actually wanted to start with a question from Gabriel Cleveland, our publisher, who also spent a lot of time with this work and gushes about it all the time to us. He says, this question is for everyone, but especially Darius and Allison. You touched on this as well. Tonight, we've had the pleasure of celebrating your mother, Susie, and in doing so, allowing her words to ring out across the veil. I wonder if you could give the audience some insight about how important it is on both a personal level and for the literary world as a whole for presses to remember, honor, and publish the work of writers that were lost too soon. So maybe Darius, we could talk about you first, and then Allison, if you want to jump in, we could talk about that as well.
Yeah, I think it is really important. And one of the things, some of the road bumps that my dad wanted to publish this book directly following the accident, and I think it was difficult both on a personal level but also for the poetry community, just because the loss was so fresh, and it was so hard to imagine the work being represented without her here. And I think one of the hard things that presents is kind of, I think I got some responses, even just from getting this kind of like sort of teasing out there, like, would, you be interested in this book or something, that were along the lines of, we're really hesitant to publish a book by an author who's not around to promote it, which I understand from a business standpoint. But I also think it's really too bad. And I wonder, like, I think something that I love seeing in contemporary poetry is this like reverence for ancestors, for including work within the original work that speaks back and speaks to. And I also love, like in Poetry Magazine, they're doing these portfolios of poets who were never published in poetry during their lifetime. And I think that's a really lovely tribute. And sort of recalling brilliance and remembrance of these poets who didn't have that opportunity. But I also think, I think it's so important. I think that I was nervous on a personal level to represent the book. I said that, but I think that I just have to trust that the poems are really deserving of this beautiful, home, and that they will speak for themselves. But I think that, I'm just so, I don't know how else to answer, but like with gratitude to CavanKerry for giving it a shot, and for also, gratitude for allowing me to be in conversation and in communion with Susie in a way that I would never dreamed of being possible. I think like that's one of the things about posthumous collections, is that you're allowing a poet or a translator to have this closeness and intimacy with someone who might be distanced from them otherwise. So
yeah, thank you so much for that. And I'm sorry that there are other presses, that can't see that vision. We do understand the business standpoint, and then it goes into the conversation of the literary arts being transactional versus being transformational, for instance,
right,
and where that fits in the storyline of publishing. Thank you so much, Darius. Allison, would you like to talk a bit about that as well? You're muted. Thank you.
Thank you. This is an issue that I'm confronting as the widow of someone who was a very fine poet, but a lot of people knew him as an editor. John's work with SIU Press and the Crab Orchard series in poetry, which has fallen to me since his passing, was monumental. During his lifetime, he saw over 100 books by other writers into print. And I always thought my role as his wife was not to get him to fix a house or do the lawn. I wanted him to write his own poems. So during his lifetime, he published 3 books. Natural State, which was published by our good friends at Glassliar Press. And There Is Many a Good Thing, which was published by Salmon Poetry, and God of the Kitchen, which is also published by Glassliar Press. And I'm particularly proud that Glassliar Press did God of the Kitchen, because it's a book about something that people deem non-poetic. It's a book about labor. Specifically, it's a book about John's time as a teenage fry cook working at KFC. And he had initially no belief that this could be a poetry collection, that he talked about these stories that frankly horrified me. The kind of work he was doing as a very young person, 14, 15 years old, working long hours in dangerous conditions. That, those fast food working conditions are terrible.
Yeah.
And he said, nobody wants to read about this. And he would tell me these stories. He told me one story, which became a poem in that book, about having to actually physically crack the chicken when it would come frozen, and getting a splinter embedded in his palm and not knowing it and just going along, working until it became infected. And I said, yeah, people need this book. So I think there are ways that we can remember poets that are gone. You know, we can, I usually open up my readings now that I do with a poem of John's. At AWP, we did a panel a few years ago on this very topic. How do we continue to honor poets who have passed?
Yeah.
And I remember Brian Turner was on that panel, and he was talking about his wife, the fine poet Elise Kuznets. So we have to balance it. We can have contests. And another poet that I would like to have enter the chat right now is Jake Adam York, who was a friend of mine and a friend of John's, and we published several of his collections through the Crab Orchard series and poetry. And he charged us, part of Jake's mission as a poet was to write poems for the martyrs of the civil rights movement in this country, because we know the big names, but there were so many everyday people who put their lives on the line. And Jake wanted us to continue to write poems for those people. And that's one way we can keep people alive, by keeping their vision alive, reading their poems, but also doing what they tasked us to do while they were alive. And that was one of the things that Jake brought to the world. And the last thing I want to say is naming. I know we have a culture of prizes and contests, but if we can name, and there are several prizes named for John and several prizes named for Jake, I think that piques curiosity from people who like, who is Jake Adam York? Who is John Treble? What is this Jake Adam York Poetry Prize? So naming prizes and contests for people who are no longer with us is a connection. And it's, you know, I hate the commerce part of it, but it is a way to keep their names alive.
Yeah, there has to be a way that, you know, there has to exist together in a way. Yeah, and that's true. You know, just saying their names literally keeps that memory alive. And thank you for sharing that stuff about John, and Tamara's putting John's books in the chat for those interested in looking up John's work. One pointed thing you also mentioned, Allison, and I think it goes to this reading here. There's the idea of memory, and then there's the idea of mission, and how that marries each other, right? So we can have in memoriam readings, in memoriam prizes, but there's also something about continuing the work that the person was doing when they were here. And that's, I think, all that soul work, all that soul magic stuff that really keeps those people in these spaces with us while we're talking and we're shedding vibrations and sharing words and sharing laughs. Thank you so much, Allison and Darius. We'll have time for a couple more questions. Darius, this one is from Tamara, our social media coordinator. And thank you, Tawanda and Darius, for complimenting Tamara's work on socials. If you're not following CavanKerry Press on socials, you should be. If you're not following us on our newsletters, you should be. We have wonderful work from all of our artists that we're always working on, and we try to present them in the most flashy and beautiful ways that we can. So Tamara put that stuff in the chat also. Her question is, Darius, you were also very helpful in determining the artwork we ultimately use for this gorgeous collection that I have with me right now, which is by an Iranian artist named Maryam Lemay. If you can talk about how vital it is to honor the work and heritage of the writing within by choosing artwork from a similar cultural background, that would be great.
Yeah. So I have loved this image for so long, and it's, yeah, Maryam Lemay Harvani. She's a fairly, I think she's in Canada, but she's part of the Iranian diaspora. She was working in Iran for a long time, and she's really interested. You see the two birds and the flower imagery in this classical Persian art style that's called Golemore, which is flower and bird. And the idea is that it's this eternal striving for the beloved, for God, and the bird. Typically in classical Persian artworks, never is sort of like is always striving for it, but never touches the flower. In her work, you see birds as flowers. You see the birds being like smothered in them, and flowers surrounded by them, which I love. And I think that actually speaks really well to what you were talking about in this, like, hearkening back to hearkening back to the tradition that one is working within. As part of the Iranian diaspora, it's that bridge between being like Iranian American, having this sort of deep and ancestral literary past. Susie loved Rumi. She had her first book, each section was broken with Rumi, translated by Coleman Barks, which I think now we have better translations, but there are really good resonances with Rumi's sort of project in Susie's work. And through Susie, I was able to read Rumi's work, and sort of Farrokhzad and so many other really beautiful. I've just been reading Ahmed Shamlu, and like some amazing Gerus Abdul Malekian. He's a contemporary Iranian poet. So like there's this kind of like transmission of knowledge that happens when you sort of go back to the poets who directly influenced other poets, and you get back to these ancestral pasts. And what I really wanted with this book was to accentuate that, because of this sort of mother and son relationship. I'm a poet now. My father is a poet. My stepmom is a poet. Like we have this sort of familial poetry thing going on. We share words. We like can't hide anything from each other because it's just all there in the work, which is like good and bad sometimes for me. But the with Susie, it was really special because I was able to go back and get to know her. And back to what I was saying, I wanted this book to have community, to emphasize the really good work that Iranian artists are doing, both in the diaspora and in Iran, because I think that's what she really cared about in her work, and she cared about holding up people of various diasporas. The anthology that came out is a Middle Eastern diaspora anthology. Is Naomi Shihab Nye and Roger Sederat and so many amazing writers in there who have shared experience of just yearning, longing for home, also finding home in like revelation within this practice of poetry. And I think that, so that was, for me, it was really important to have someone on the cover of this book who also cared about these pursuits and this transmission of knowledge, and like pushing it forward and pushing it into a contemporary space.
Yeah, for sure. There's something about not only an ethnic, but also kind of like you mentioned it earlier when you were talking about working through the books with your mom. Like, you were akin in a way that's beyond blood and birth, right? You were almost kindred souls of working through literature. And I think it's important for us to think about those literary legacies, those ethnic legacies, and also literary legacies, and seeing how that works itself out. Tawanda, how are you, sir? I'm about to bump you into this chat.
I'm doing great. I could just listen to like Darius talk forever.
That's great. That's great. I wanted to end.
It still feels the same.
Yeah. I wanted to end with a bit of a craft question here. So Tawanda, this is especially for you too. So, what does craft and the writing of poetry look like to you? You write a lot about family and siblings being across waters. So how does that influence your writing in like direct and indirect ways? And then I'll kick that question around to everyone else.
Yeah, I'm still struggling with how to really represent family in my work, partially because I just haven't been home in a long time,
Right.
but also with I would say the deep ambivalence I have with my relationship with being Motswana and being diasporic,
Mhm.
African and Black, in that a lot of the poets that I've been directly influenced by tend to be Western canonical poets, particularly 20th century American poets, in particular Plath, which has made my relationship with identity and poetry more charged than I would have previously liked.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm in a pretty puzzling place right now where I don't quite know what to do with that. That being said, I mean they are like obvious African poetic influences in my work, and that with contemporary poets in particular, Safio Hilo being especially relevant to me personally, and also Clifton Gachagua, both
Mhm.
of whose first books came out from the African Poetry Book Fund.
Mhm.
So I'm still navigating that question from a spiritual place. Craft-wise, I've tended to written my poems from a very intuitive place, from a place of for this project in particular of a kind of profound suffering and depression.
Mm.
Now that I'm way past that, thank God, I'm trying to think about, well, how do we like actually write poems and it's not just about trying to save yourself from bad emotions? Not that that's necessarily bad, you know, it's just that there are other reasons why I'm into poetry. I'm into poetry because it can be a fascinating way of tackling philosophical questions. Or, you know, I used to freestyle rap a lot. I used to do
Hey,
concerts,
okay.
care about rhythm and meter. I came up through spoken word too. So how do I come back to poetry as an aesthetic tool and not just as a therapeutic tool? Is what I'm thinking about nowadays.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think this is gonna have to selfishly be a conversation afterwards. I want to hear about the spoken word stuff.
Oh,
You emceeing. I want to
oh,
hear
I
the
bad.
story.
We're talking about 5-6 years. But yeah,
Oh
we
man. All
can
right.
talk about.
Okay.
We can talk about.
Oh man, Tawanda, thank you so much, brother. Thank you. Thank you.
Of course, of course.
Darius, going back to you, I would love to know how having these lessons with your mother through the editing of this book, how has it structured some of your own writing? What lessons have you learned from editing Susie's book that you're taking into your own work?
Yeah, lessons of being, like I mentioned during the reading of the
Mm.
poems. But I think also it was really seminal for me to retype those poems. I think if I had had a digital copy of the book, I would have understood her poems less. And I
Uh-huh.
think I would have understood my own poems less. Jory has us do this exercise, Jory Graham in workshop where we type 5 poems from each book that we read. And so I've done it before, but I never did it with a full collection.
Mhm.
And getting to do that was beautiful, both in the sense that I got to know her intimately in like the poetic style, moves. I sort of could figure out a kind of terminology for talking about her work, which was important. But I also was able to differentiate, probably for the first time in my life, the kind of thing that I'm doing in my work that's different, but is also that continues some of the work she was doing. But like it helped me. I think one thing when I was growing up that I was terrified of was that I would always be trying to write a poem that was as good as Susie's, or that was as beautiful, that was as like I without Susie there, I was often told I looked like her, that I was like her in spirit, that thank God I was alive because I can do this work of surviving her. But I think that for me, that caused a lot of, anxiety about, okay, but who am I then? That's like, who am I? And I think that getting to type her poems, I was like, oh, my voice is so different in beautiful ways. Even if I'm writing mostly, like a lot of my poems are about Susie. A lot of my poems are about my family, the same family that she wrote about. And I think that for me, it was like I was getting to inhabit her voice and then getting to, and sort of with the reading that this is my first time reading from her book tonight. And I think that getting to do that, it was not like a channeling, but it was definitely, and it felt like I was in communion with her, and that once I sort of dropped down from that space, I could get back to, like, I don't think I'm mixing or blurring our voices very much. I think that we're both contributing to the abundance of voices, this polyvocality of poetry that I think is like, that's all like interwoven, but not quite like, I guess the same. And I think that for me, this year, it was like, how do I come to terms? How do I like include those other voices, those other registers and tones, and differentiate them from the kind of voice that I want to be speaking from?
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, thanks so much for that, Darius. Yeah, the idea of polyvocality and being able to separate voices, right? Even separating voices within our own work could become complicated sometimes, right? So the fact that you've been able to sit with this project for such a long time, it's probably super valuable to you to be able to help differentiate those voices, honor those voices, and also still have yourself. So you're on your way, kid. That's awesome. I love it. Allison, so maybe a good craft question for you would be, how do you feel like your work has changed over time? Like where do you feel your headspace is at when you come to the page?
Well, some people know me as a formalist poet. Some people know me as a free verse poet. Some people know me as a poet who writes about race. Some people who know me as a feminist poet. I think the longer I write, the more labels get stuck on my back. But what I like to do is like switch the labels around. It's like, hi, you don't know which one you're getting this time. And part of what I think the evolution of a lot of American poets, since a lot of us teach, whether we're actually in the academy or we teach independently, so we're always looking for ways to encourage a poem out of ourselves or out of other people. So a lot of the things I teach myself to do are things that I intend to teach other people. So I'm also obsessive and a bit of a hoarder. So I hoard poetic forms, just like the way I hoard dresses and notebooks. So sometimes you'll find me and everything I'm writing is a villanelle, or sometimes you'll find me and everything I'm writing is a hustle. And I like full ass hustles, rhyme and refrain. Aga Shahid Ali's instructions are in my brain. That's another poet that we have to pay homage to, Aga Shahid Ali. So I find that being a teacher of poetry is very important to my own poetic practice. And even when I step away from this particular university, which looks like maybe in a couple of years, I keep saying that, but I think I'll be either teaching myself or teaching other people. And one thing to do is to also teach young people, teach children about poetry, because they've already got so much poetic fire in them anyway.
Right.
And I love teaching third graders and teenagers, which everybody's like, you're crazy. Why do you spend your time teaching teenagers? It's like, because they are hilarious.
Yes. Yes, they are. Allison, anything else?
In terms of poet, I just want to touch back about Plath. Plath snares us all, so don't feel bad about that, T. Plath she's problematic and terrible in so many ways, but then you read and it's straight fire. So I can see how you get snared, but one of my tricks is whenever a poet snares me is I write a poem back to that poet.
Yes. Oh yeah, yeah. The writing back poem.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. You know what? That might actually be. We've been here for a while, y'all. So I think that's a good spot to have a closing. And what I want to do to end, because as a poet myself, I do talk to these ghosts sometimes, have conversations with them, right? Maybe we should evoke some other folks one last time. So Darius, if you want to end with one last poem from Susie, and then Allison, if you're amenable to it, if you want to end with a poem from John, I think that'd be a great way for us to close this evening. Okay, so Darius, I'll let you go first with Susie, and then we'll go over with Allison. And before we do that, all thank you so much again. You're gonna get the links to these books again, some of which are on sale. Please support these artists again, not just this month for this reading, but every month. These three are doing really great work out here, and you can tell by the conversations we had that they're also wonderful human beings. So Darius, you can take us out.
Okay. I think I want to read Light. It's from close to the book. Light. 1. Tehran, Iran. Against the street dark of lamps in downtown Tehran, Muslims carry burning eyes of candles in the hollow pits of their hands, the arches glowing quiet between thumb and forefinger. Haifa. Shame, one man says. In the backyard of grandmother's house, the roses drink from her palms. A stale smoke rises from the grill, flesh still attached. She watches the moon lift early over the shimmering green of leaves and thinks, Inshallah, God willing, this world is a dream. 2. Zaranj, Afghanistan. Qasem's brother knows what will happen now. These bombs will be worse than the floods. He packs his only bag with matches, apples, wheat, almonds, water, the rounded roof of his house moving by like an oversized fig. He drifts from country to country, wishes for a time when no lines divided them, when the land knew no difference. His shirt checkers his back. His heart skips and gasps in his feet. He steps lightly from Zaranj to Zabul. He will lose track of the days. 3. Holland, Michigan. Dunes burst from the lakeshore, Michigan cloud smokes. My hands catch fog, fan the driveway, swing home, fingers, sunfire, leaves yellow on black. Think lit bodies falling, ash-ridden faces. Every image has changed its meaning. Grandma June, tell me this is only a dream. Fill my words with your spoons full of honey, and let my bed's net canopy spill and tuck beneath my mattress. Step into my dark house. Leave me, never knowing light this way.
Beautiful. Thank you, Susie. Thank you, Darius. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, Allison.
Hi. I had to dash off and go find a copy of, this is John's second book. And I know I tell a lot of stories, but I was the cover photographer for this book because when Salmon said, oh, we need a cover, John didn't have any idea. And he's like, do you still have that photo you took of the blue leaf? And that's the blue leaf. And me being a silly poet, I thought that nature had blessed us with an unusual and strange blue leaf among these fall leaves that were around our house. No, it was because the power company had come and, you know, they had spray painted where they were going to dig and it got on one of the leaves. But this is John's second book, which takes us all over the world. John's older brother, the only surviving sibling of John, had a older sister and an older brother. He was the baby. His brother is the only one who survives of the three of them. He was stationed as a doctor in the Navy in Egypt. So this book takes us to Egypt. This book takes us to the American Midwest. It takes us to Indiana, to London, to New York. But I love, of course, any poem John wrote where I appear. And this, I'm going to read the final section of a long poem called Temporary Landscape. And John suffered from sleep apnea, and he was one of the first people I ever knew who was diagnosed with sleep apnea. He had one of the first sleep studies done at University of Arkansas Medical Sciences Hospital. So he describes what it's like to have that condition in this poem. Section V, Temporary Landscape. Returning home for AJ. Each breath I take at night seeks to deny my life. 385 times my lungs closed, stopped, and I woke gasping to continue. Apnea, they tell me, and so I accept the continuous positive airway pressure of 13 centimeters to keep my sleep constant. Find delta for the first time in 10 years. Let REM build a new world in my head rather than threaten to pull it all down. I anchor to this machine. It's hose my claim on oxygen, my elephantine surrogate lung pushing air past all my obstructions. More than any place, it keeps me alive, yet it keeps me from you. We tangle together at night, air rushing off my face, my mask between your lips and mine. Could we but kiss away all this technology, this physiological wall inside my throat, I would tie myself to you each night rather than it. Take the moist air around us and breathe our lives deeply.
Allison Josephs, everyone, thank you so much for evoking John Tribble with us this evening. And all, thank you so much, you at home, you on YouTube, you in the Zoom chat right now, for hanging out with us and listening and celebrating with us, and just being merry in the celebration of words and the celebration of spirits and the celebration of poets. At this point in time, I would love for Tawanda and Gabe to put everyone else off mute so they could give their congratulatory remarks to the readers this evening. Thank you all so much for hanging out with us. This is an amazing, amazing end to our 27th reading, and it's the end of our season. Thank you so much, everyone. We will be back for a regularly scheduled programming with our fall season happening in October. So we're going to be taking a break now until October. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Darius. Thank you, Tawanda. Thank you, Allison. And thank you, the CavanKerry team and the audience, for being with us this evening. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Cheers.
Beautiful.
Stack full of tissues.